boys and girls. This is the Chaingang podcast, episode 13. Unfortunately, Ryan will not make it for the second week in a row. It's always disappointing to see. But we have a new guest on, and it's our buddy Parker from the Grove City football team. So, Parker, we're so happy to have you on, talk football, and, all that shit.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, of course. And I guess we'll just get right into it. Kind of talk about how you kind of got into football. When was the first oh my God, I love this, kind of thing. When did that kind of hit you?
Yeah, so I knew in kindergarten that I always wanted to play football. My name is Parker, and I always idolized Willie Parker. I even have his jersey. I might have it. I don't have it. Never mind. But Willie Parker was my idol, and I always wanted to play running back. And so I got in when I was in second grade, I believe. I was 7 years old when I first started playing. And it was my dad played football growing up, and he always talked about how much fun it was. I had fun watching it. The Steelers were playing really well, so the hometown was bustling. So I played what they called midgets. I think it's Tiger Pride now. And they were like, well, you're tall and kind of big, so we're going to put you on the offense and defensive line. And I was like, I'm 7, so I don't really understand anything for that matter. Right. So I was like, oh, this is great. I'm super excited. I sucked. I was so bad. I was the worst because I was so nice that I couldn't hit somebody, and it didn't come as easily as I had hoped. So I was like, all right, well, you know what? It'll be fine. And then I got to middle school, and my 7th grade year, I did really, really well. I played on the 8th grade team, so I played up a year. And so my school is ginormous, by the way. So when I was growing up, we always had more than one team. In midgets, we had more than one team for middle. We had 3 middle schools. Each middle school had a team. So all the middle schools would play each other, which was the most fun I've ever had, is playing against people that you kind of know and grew up playing with in an actual game. This is a side story. So we were playing So there's 3 middle schools. There's Ingomar, Marshall, and Carson. And we beat the ever-living piss out of Carson because they were just bad. They were so bad. And then we played Marshall, and Marshall was the good team. And we were right up with them. It was a defensive game. I was playing, at that point, they had moved me to defensive end, and I was also playing right tackle. And, again, back and forth. It was 6-6 because nobody could kick extra points because, middle school. And there was 2 minutes left. We're driving down the field. Running back fumbles it. And the worst player on their 8th grade team, who was playing down in 7th grade, picks up the ball, ran the entire length of the field, and scored. And to this day, with my buddies that went to Marshall, we still argue about whether it was a legit play because he was in 8th grade and he played on the 8th grade team, but they ended up winning 12-6. And I remember that was the first moment where I was really, really upset about football. And I think that's kind of the moment where I was I really like football and I hate to lose. And that was kind of the moment. I remember that sticking with me. And it keeps you a chip on your shoulder because that first major loss in any sports career is one that will just constantly ride with you. And it's something that you never want to feel again. So then I ended up playing my freshman year because 8th grade, in the span of 6 months, my 8th grade year, I fractured my ankle and I got a concussion. And that was the first moment when I got my concussion where I was like, oh, that injuries again. And that's when I was kind of football, it's a career, but I realized at this point I might not be good enough to make it to the pros. So
was that your first concussion?
That was my first diagnosed concussion. I probably had more before that. in any case, so my freshman year is when I really, I mean, we had a freshman team, so it was just all the freshmen, and it was mostly for, like the varsity coaches to scout out, varsity guy or like who could play on varsity. I started both ways the entire season, and of a team of like 50 people, I would say that was pretty impressive. I played against another guy. His name was Parker Mihelic. And they called him P Titty, and I was Peter. I was the penis. He was the tits.
Nice.
It was really funny because the coaches got into it too. But that was one of the most fun years I probably ever had. And then I went to varsity and I realized, oh no, like they take shit really seriously.
Right.
I mean, they would call it 12-hour days. So you'd go to school at like 6 or 7. Don't even remember anymore. You go to school like 7, done with classes, and then immediately to the football field. Class let out at 2:15. We started practice at 3, so they give us a like 45-minute break. And also I had 2 high schools. We had a 9-10 building and an 11-12 building, and they were like really far apart. So it'd also give them the 10th graders a chance to get to the field. So we would practice and work out until 7 o'clock at night. And I remember just being like, oh, this is great. So my 10th grade year, I played with a bunch of D1 guys. Josh Lugg, who currently, I think he might still play for Notre Dame. Nico Murmagus, he plays at Dartmouth. I think they're all graduating now. Chris Stilly was on that team. Ethan Menza, like all those guys were phenomenal athletes. And I wouldn't be here today without those guys. And that's kind of the importance of having a practice squad as well. Because I was way too small to be an offensive lineman. But that's what I played all my life. So I tried my damnedest. But when you have a guy that's 6'5", a 5-star recruit to Notre Dame, 315 pounds, it doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of hard to beat out that.
Yeah, absolutely. So eventually.
And for reference, Parker, how big are you? Or like, were you in high school? Like, are you kind of the same size you were now?
I was about 5'10", 180 my sophomore year. I bulked up to 200 that year. Right now I'm about 6 foot 220.
Okay.
That's kind of what I was like 200 in high school, 6 foot though.
Okay.
So
okay.
Eventually they moved me to tight end. Played really well my junior year. What sucked is I would play like the second. I was the backup tight end for varsity, but I was the starter for JV. So I'd play like half a game Friday nights, and then I'd wake up at like 6 a.m. Saturday morning, drive 2 hours, and then go play a JV game. Which that was also really fun.
That
my
sounds
senior
like
year,
ass.
I mean, hey, I was playing football, so I didn't really care.
Yeah, true.
My senior year, unfortunately, concussions. So I actually didn't get to play my senior year, which was really upsetting, but it led to where I am today. So now I didn't really fit in the Grove City offense for D3, but I still have like friendships to a lot of those guys. And yeah, so that's kind of my football journey, very much abridged because I could go into it and talk about it forever.
Yeah.
I mean, Dylan, because I still talk about it.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. Well, I kind of want to go back a little bit. I didn't want to interrupt you in your story because you had that flow and you were just spinning it off. But was that one game where that shitty kid, when he scored that game-winning touchdown, was that the game where you were like, okay, I'm not being nice anymore? Like, this like, you kind of got your killer instinct from that game, or did you kind of get it before?
Yeah. I'd say it comes and goes a lot of the time. It really depends. It was, yeah, I guess you could say that actually. Because I know that was a big turning point in not only like my personal life and how like athletics relates to your personal life and how you go about that, but also, yeah, that was kind of like the turning switch of like, oh, like I could have hit harder. I could have, if I would have made the tackle in the backfield, like how could that have changed the game? Or if I instead of hesitating, just went and hit the quarterback before he threw it. Like, how could that have changed? After that moment, I did see a big turning point in how I played, like even into my freshman year and beyond that. That's when my dad actually started keeping track of like how many kids I hurt. Because at one point, because I also played lacrosse too, and at one point, this is a side story, but I was coming across in lacrosse, right in front of the goalie, there's a 6-foot crease. I came across the crease and I hit this kid and I broke his femur.
Shit.
Yeah. So like, and my dad would be like, "Oh, there's another one. Chalk it up." I was like, "Oh boy."
So kind of, I guess, going into your college career, what was kind of, I know, maybe you didn't, work as well with the team, but going into college, what was kind of the biggest adjustment you had to make from, playing in high school to then college?
Well, there's two major things, and goes for any athlete that wants to play a college sport. You will most likely be humbled very quickly. I went to a 6A school, one of the top schools in Pennsylvania, to a D3 school. And I was like, even after not playing my senior year, I was like, yeah, like I'm going to start day one. Like I'm going to be in this offense. But I came in and it was nothing like I had expected. I came from a school that was, one tight end down set to a wing T offense. So they would have 5 offensive linemen and then they have a wing in the backfield. And that's basically what I was. So I was a fullback tight end and they would use him as a pooler. So basically I was cleaning up DNs all day where I'd go up and hit the middle linebacker. Whereas I came from a high school that was very much, it was still running the ball, but they would use that tight end as either a double team or just to kick out the end and then run the ball up the middle. So it was a complete dramatic shift. And I had to basically talk to guards that were in high school and ask them like pulling tips. Cause I hadn't pulled since I played tackle my freshman year of high school. So it was like 3-4 years. But really, and my advice for any athlete that's looking to play, at least at a D3, D2, or even D1 level for that matter, is look into where you're going to and look at your position before you sign that offer letter and see if you fit in that offense. Because a lot of the reason of why I don't play for Grove City anymore is because I didn't see myself fitting in the offense. There was a week where a lot of the offensive linemen went down and they knew that I played offensive line in high school and I was at down tight end and they were just like, heck, go play tackle. So I played tackle for, 2 weeks and I was like back in kind of my comfort zone. And then whenever they kind of put me back in the tight end fullback, I was like, well, I kind of lost that enjoyment factor. I missed being in the trenches. And I realized at 220, 6 foot, like I honestly was not big enough. And I'm a pretty big guy, but even at a high level D3 school, like I still was not big enough. And again, that's another big, humbling factor. It also depends on kind of the coaches that you're going into, talking with the coaches and getting to know the coaches beforehand too, as well as a fantastic point. Coach Donato here at Grove City is fantastic. He's one of the best people I've ever met. And there's a lot of life lessons that I pulled out of, even though I only played here for a year. Like there's so many life lessons I pulled out of that. And I could talk about that for hours.
So more to like the enjoyment of football, just playing sports. What was the biggest part for you getting into football? Like for me, I was a nervous kid. I never really liked hitting people until I got it like later years of football. So I love to work at something. So what was that for you?
Yeah. Honestly, the crowd is the big factor. I remember one of the moments where I first like really laid somebody out. I remember clear as day. It was my freshman year. I was playing 3 technique. I was nose tackle. Came right through the line and just absolutely murked this running back. Like Jadeveon Clowney against Michigan kind of type of hit. Absolutely killed this kid. And the entire crowd, because we were playing away, and the entire crowd just goes, "Oh!" And I was just like, that's when you know, like, I get jittery. I get jittery just thinking about it. Like, that's when you know you absolutely like hammered someone. And even like when you're playing in a home crowd, I mean, for high school, I played in front of, I think our record was like 6,000 people. Like, it was insane how many people we played in front of. Yeah. And like both our home and away sections are ginormous, and we filled both of them. And I remember one time I caught a 2-point conversion off a failed PAT. Some wacky stuff happened behind. The backup quarterback fumbled the snap. He rolled out. I was right there. I heard the call. I was right there, wide open, caught it, and you hear the crowd cheer. And it was just like, it gives you that extra little motivation. Like, yeah, like they're happy. But that's also a mixed bag, because if the crowd gets really mad at you and like, you know, boo you or cuss you out, like I missed a block in a game, because it happens. Like, football is it's a long game, and like you're gonna mess up, you're gonna have those. And I had like some old dude come up to me, he's like, "Hey, you won, you missed a block on that one, we could have had you help there." And it was just kind of like, all right. But I also did like, yeah. And then also like, it's a lot of personal things too, because I was just like, I had also had a fantastic game that game, so I'm not going to let that kind of destroy it. But the crowd is especially like, even in midgets, when you occasionally have like a nice hit and you hear like the crowd cheer, like your coach is being proud of you. And coaches in general are just like a huge factor of that as well. Having a bad coach can ruin your enjoyment of a sport 100%. I was not very fond of my high school football coach, and it was just like he referred to me as my number and not my name, and I was just kind of like, all right, that kind of shows a little bit of your character, yeah. But like definitely the crowd and the coaches are like the two things that really pushed me. My dad also was, and my parents in general and my family were very like supportive of me, and like even if I had a bad game, they were still very, very supportive.
Definitely. To kind of piggyback off of what you've been saying, so going to a school that big at a young age, I know a lot of people feel an immense amount of pressure from fans, from opposing teams, higher recruits. So how did that affect you? And moving into, a D3 college, did it become more for the love of the game? Did you feel less pressure? What's the difference between the two?
Oh, there's 100% less pressure when you're playing. Like Friday night lights is like, even if you mess up on Friday, people talk about it on Monday. We would be in the film room on Saturday. There's a lot of pressure, and it kind of made me a perfectionist in a way of like, if I don't do this perfectly, or if I, my offensive line coach was so meticulous on steps. Like, there's your forward step, there's your down step, and then there's your reach step. And if your reach step wasn't perfectly at a 90-degree angle, he'd be in your face. And it was a lot of pressure. Whereas you came here and it was just kind of like, the coaches are a lot more relaxed, because they realize that like, we've done it, we've been through it, we don't really have to go through the motions, we know what we're doing. We have a style, and if that style works, then there's not much to fix. So going from, Monday full, like high school was Monday full pads, Tuesday full pads, Wednesday full pads, Thursday's helmet, Friday game. At college, it was Monday, it was like shorts and shoulder pads, and even later in the season it was just helmets. To like Tuesday, it was like, I think that was our full pads day. And then Wednesday was like, shorts again. Thursday was shorts. So it was a lot more relaxed, and like, they kind of knew that you knew what you were doing, and if it was working, they wouldn't go and change it. Like when I came in, I would pull and I would hit with my shoulder, and they taught me to go like with my chest like this, instead of going leading with my shoulder. So that was one of the things that they fixed, because they realized that in D3, those guys are a lot faster off the line, and they're a lot faster making those decisions. And instead of going here and they can just cut off your inside shoulder or cut off your outside shoulder, if you come at them straight, they don't really have a place to cut off of. So that was one of the things that I learned. So like high school is very meticulous, because they kind of prepare you for at least from my experience, they prepare me for the next level of if what you're doing works, they're not going to change it. Unless you're at maybe a D1 school and they have a way of doing it. And I can't speak for all college athletics, but if they have a way and they want you to do it, they'll, make you do it. But high school was so much more perfection driven, and college was very much like, if you're doing it, if it works, we're not going to go about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So with D3 schools, you see a lot of people, maybe had injuries in high school or trickled down from a D2 school. So you see a huge range of talents. So what do you see, having been a D3 player, on your team or against other teams? Like, yeah, obviously, like someone just got drafted from a D3 school last year. You see a huge range. So what have you seen?
Yeah, D3, you're always going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 guys. If you go to depending on the program, it really depends on the program. And that's where recruitment comes in big. If you're getting recruited at a D3 school, like you're pretty good. Like, don't sell yourself short. Like you're pretty damn good. D3 recruitment has a lot more pressure than D1 recruitment. So D3, at least, they're pulling in maybe 25 guys a year. And of those 25 guys, I think it's like 75% of them are going to play all 4 years with that school. So you're looking at maybe 10, 11 guys that are going to stick through it the entire time that they're there, maybe 15 at most. So whenever you're looking at that statistic, and I know my math's a little jumbled, but still, like, you're looking at that statistic, it makes recruitment for D3 so much harder, and that's why they push so much harder. Whereas like a D2 school, your best D2 player is probably going to go NFL. Same thing with your best D3 player. Those D1 schools, what they're going to do, especially, and why I'm kind of against a lot of people taking D1 offers, is they're going to say, oh, you're going to start day one. You're going to be out there. We got 100,000 fans out there that are going to be screaming your name, cheering your name. They come in and they'll redshirt you immediately. And there's no pressure on the recruiters to say like, oh, I recruited this one guy from this small 2A school, and if he doesn't play, it's no big deal, because they're pulling in recruitment classes of over 100 guys. Of those 100 guys, a lot of them are not going to stick with it, but that's okay, because they're still pulling in 100 every year. And of those 100 guys, you're going to have a really good team regardless. So the talent pool that you're going to pull based on D1, D2, D3, D3, you're not going to have a lot of guys, but all of them are going to be equally talented. I look at certain guys that were on the bench, and I was like, you honestly are good enough to play any other D3 school. But the fact that you're here and how deep we are, like, let's take defensive end, for example. There was tons of defensive ends. And I was like, you could easily play at any other D3 school in the conference. You could play at any D3 school in the conference. Like Cody Gustafson could have easily probably fringe D1 starter. Like, yeah, that talent pool, it's when you go to a D1 school, unless you're the top 1% of that draft class, you're probably not going to play. You're probably not going to start. And in my case, like, if you're really in it for the love of the game, look at those D2, look at those D3 schools, because if you're a standout at a D3 school, it's going to make a lot more sense for NFL recruits to look at you. If you started all 3 years at a D3 school, like top prospect, blowing out all these records, than if you were a D1 player and barely started, up until your senior year and you barely did anything. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but the easy way to look at it, I got sticky notes, perfect. So like all of them kind of fit on this sticky note. D1 has this little section up here, D2, D3, but all of them are still on the sticky notes. So there's NFL talent in every single level, 100%. Is there a lot more at the D1 level? Absolutely. Is there still some at the D3 level? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously there is a lot of talented D3 guys. Just because it's like one of the lower divisions doesn't mean there isn't going to be talent. But But Parker, because I kind of know you personally, we've talked about all of your injuries, and we kind of know you have a history of concussions. And I know it's kind of a joke in the fraternity, whatever.
Oh yeah.
So like, how did your concussions affect you in like how you play? And do you recommend, like, is there any way that, like, because the NFL has been trying to make the game safer for a while
Mhm.
now, with all these new penalties and stuff like that. Is there any way you think that they could make it safer, or what they're doing is the right way to go? They have to adjust the helmets. What's your kind of thinking on that?
My thinking of it is you're never going to erase concussions from, in that case, any sport for that matter. You can get a concussion in any sport. Frankly, do I think making better helmets is going to drastically reduce that? Yeah, absolutely. I love what some of these companies are doing. I think Vicus, I think is the company name. They're starting to make position specific helmets. I think that's the best decision they could have ever made, because offensive line, do you really need a lot of protection in the back of your head? No, you need it in the front, because that's where you're going to get most of your hits. For wide receivers, you're going to be landing in awkward positions. So you're going to, like, let's say you land on the turf, hit the side of your head. You're going to need that protection on the side of your head, whereas all the linemen's going to need it up front. I think that's the smartest decision they've ever made. You can only make the game as safe as possible. In any sport you play, you're going to have an injury risk. Lacrosse, I watched guys tear their ACL. I mean, I broke a guy's femur. Like, you're going to get hurt in sports. And I think if you can minimize that as much as possible without taking out the tradition of the game, I think that's the best way to go about it. Do I think that what the NFL is doing in certain instances takes away from that? Absolutely. Look at roughing the passer, and I'm like, there's a lot of plays where it feels like the offensive line doesn't have as important of a role. If I can just go like this and I get roughing the passer, then it makes it to the point where, like, if I miss this block, it's okay, because even if he gets hit or he throws the ball off soon enough, we're going to get 15 yards out of it anyways. So I think it takes out a lot of the origin of the game. But do I think it's a great decision? Absolutely. It makes the game safer. So there's a lot of positives and negatives on making the game safer so that more people are into it, versus if you want to take away the tradition of the game and make it drastically different from what it was 70 years ago.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, it is complicated to, try to make such a tough, aggressive sport, safer. So I agree. I like what the NFL is doing. I didn't know that they were doing, that thing with the helmets. That's actually very smart and pretty sick, actually. But how did those concussions that you chalked up, how did that kind of affect you? Obviously you probably had to sit for a little bit. Did it even affect you, like, when you came back?
Yeah. So, especially when you're coming back from injury, there is a level of hesitation because you don't want to re-injure that, which is the worst thing you can have. And even in life, like if you're driving, like hesitation is the worst thing you can have. In sports, it's even like, it's also pretty dangerous to have as well. So, yeah, I'd go on to say, like, there's a big level of hesitation that goes into playing as an athlete after, my first concussion. Like, you could tell that, it took about a week for me to kind of get back into, like, after the first game being back, you could tell that there was a little bit of like a slower approach to everything. And it kind of got to the point where, like, I think I'm on concussion number 5 at this point. So it got to the point where it was like, I either change the way I play, or I started looking at my future, and I was like, I didn't play at all my freshman year at D3. So I was just kind of like, I don't see myself really playing in this offense. I don't really want to change position. Something a lot of guys don't realize is that even though you're at a D3 school, the time commitment is still astronomical. Yep. It's even at a D3 school, it's like a full-time job. So that time commitment is insane. But still, like, I was kind of just looking at the writing at the wall, and I was like, I don't really see myself playing. The time commitment is a huge crutch. So I was just kind of like, I don't really see it in the future. It was a very sad decision because of how much I love playing. And I do love like the game of football. And I mean, I still get a lot of that enjoyment out of rugby because now I play rugby. It's a lot less time commitment. No pads. It adds a different level of difficulty, but it also makes you play safer. I was one of the dumb players who would always lead with my head. Because you have this giant helmet on and you're like, oh, if I hit somebody, like, it's not a big deal.
Right.
So you go up against, a guy like Josh Lugg, who's way bigger than you, and you try to put your head into him and try to get momentum. It's going to hurt a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And the first time I did that with rugby is they were coming up, they call it the try zone, which is basically the version of the end zone. And I was right on the line and I went straight in and I hit my head on a guy's thigh. And I remember just being like, oh, I can't do that. So you kind of have to learn to play out of, get your head out of that contact, which is what I think a lot of the NFL needs to shift to as well, is learning how to hit and learning how to hit properly, even though you have a helmet on. Football is designed for pads. Rugby isn't. But I think that a lot of sports in general should take things from other sports. So if you take learning how to tackle out of rugby and turn it into the game of football, where rugby, they basically have to keep your head out of it because if you put your head in there, you're going to have a broken nose. So I think if football were to take something from rugby and learn how to rugby tackle, I think the game could be a lot safer as well.
All right, Parker. Well, you've been a great guest. I appreciate having you on for sure. Is there anything you kind of want to say, to close off the interview part? Because Parker will stay with us for the rest of the episode to talk about some other stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there any advice you want to give to like maybe a guy going into a D3 school or, whatever?
I guess my advice is just go for it. You're never going to know until you try. And that was kind of my experience with D3 football. My parents were just kind of like, and especially my friends, when I was talking to them about it, were like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? You haven't played in a year. And I was just kind of like, what's there to lose? This kind of life advice as well is just like, you have one life, you might as well just live it. So, if you love the game, go for it. But you have to have that love. If you're wishy-washy about it and you don't know if you're going to really, either perform well, or if you're just like hesitant about it, you got to be full go, and you got to, you really got to push for it. And also, like, even people that are like, man, like, I'm going to go to this D1 school, but you don't really know if you're going to play, or you're just kind of like hesitant. Don't be like going down to a D2 or even a D3 school. You can still be a standout athlete there, and you can still possibly make it to the NFL. It's going to be harder if you go down, but you still get to play 4 years. I would rather play 4 guaranteed years. I mean, it's not guaranteed, but like, I'd rather be pretty much like a fringe D1 athlete where I got like 1 or 2 D1 offers. I'd rather go to a lower tier school, ball out 4 years, maybe get an NFL contract, than go to a D1 school and be a practice squad player for 4 years. Like that. I mean, that's my personal preference, but like, if your heart and your love's in the game, just go for it.
Yeah, when in doubt, if you're a guy sitting on the D1 bench, just go to North Dakota State. That's all you got to do, right? I mean, they're like the only D2 school that I know of, I feel like, that gets guys drafted. Are they D1?
Yeah, they're D1 double A.
All right, well, fuck my ass. I guess they're
not, like a Penn State or
Okay, well, all right, then. I mean, okay, then if you're D1, then go to a less D1 school. I guess it's North Dakota State. All right, well, that kind of wraps up the interview, Parker. I really appreciate you coming on, talking about your story. You're a great guest. You had a lot to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you really like that. So, like I said, Parker will stick with us for the rest of the episode.